I also, as an adult, can't hit another adult without risking facing charges. So why is it that children are the only ones we feel entitled that we can wail on when they don't know how the world works yet?
The critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Interested in the subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, and I'm so excited to have Monte Mader as a guest today. I'm a fan, I have to disclose before we go much further into this interview. I started seeing her posting on Instagram these amazing screeds of Bible verses, just eviscerating all of the incorrect Christian dominionism, the nationalism, New Apostolic Reformation. She was just whipping it out in just ba 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 ba, and so coherent that I was like, I want to talk to her. And we finally connected. You asked me to do your podcast, and I said, you got to come on my podcast and such. And so I was just so impressed with your clarity of mind and your values and how much you've deconstructed your own upbringing, which I'll get into in a minute. And I'll just say that you were born and raised in a cattle ranch in Wyoming, and a very strict fundamentalist family, and your father made you memorize scripture, and you were a very good girl because you're darn good. You went to Liberty University. I've interviewed a number of graduates of Liberty University who have woken up and come out the other side. But then I started checking you out, and you are an incredible artist, musician, songwriter. I really like your music. But the focus of this talk for my audience is really what's happening in America and around the world, taking scriptures out of context with these warped, values that has nothing to do with Jesus and the New Testament or the Old Testament. And you're a survivor. You emerged going, and I think when I was listening to one of your talks, you were saying that you're going to tell the story. I'm going to let you tell the story of what started ringing the bells that woke you up from that upbringing. Did I forget any essential things yet?
No, I mean, that's a pretty fabulous introduction. So thank you for having me.
It's my honor. And I'll just add, as we're recording this on Thursday, June 12th, you have 1 million followers on Instagram.
I do. As of last night. Woo. When I saw that, I just put the phone down and sat down. I was like, what is happening?
No, you're blowing up, as you should. And I want more people to know of you, which is why I want people to listen to you, learn from you, follow you, check out your music, and let's go. So you grew up on a cattle ranch in Wyoming.
Yep.
Take it away.
So my grandfather and my grandmother bought the ranch in the 50s after my grandfather had come back from World War II. Both my grandfathers served. And I grew up on a 4,000 acre ranch north of Gillette, Wyoming, raised in a very, very strict religious family. And my dad was kind of very much a patriarch of the family. And when my mom left when I was 6, that was kind of the implosion of the family. And my dad leaned more into fundamentalism, especially the misogyny of fundamentalism, in response to her leaving him. And so I was raised exclusively by my dad, and he was the only parent that I knew. But it was a very different upbringing. Most people look at me and they're like, wait, you're from, I was like, I was born and raised on a ranch. I can bale hay. I can jams and jellies, and I can also work cattle. But that was how I grew up. So it was pretty remote, very strict. I went to an elementary school that was founded by my grandfather that was named after the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
Heritage
Foundation, folks, to remind you, is who's behind the Project 2025 a master plan for dismantling democracy and creating a theocracy. And Opus Dei was involved with that Project 2025 too. So thank you for mentioning that.
Very bad. Very bad.
Very extreme. Yep. And so tell us the story. How did you go to Liberty University?
So I know. I started school really, really young. I was fascinated with language when I was young, and I would steal my siblings' homework, and I taught myself how to read. So by the time I was 4, I could read books, and my dad was like, "I'm not sending you to preschool. You're going to be bored. You're going to cause a problem." So he talked the school into letting me start kindergarten, and I ended up later skipping 6th grade as well. And that was when they did a bunch of IQ testing on me and all these like reading tests. And that was when my dad's opinion towards me changed. Up until that point, I very much grew up in a house where my dad was like, all of my sisters and I, you need to be pretty, you need to be skinny, you need to make sure you're a virgin for your husband, you need to prepare for marriage, you need to be a good wife. That's like the education for my sisters and I until I took those tests. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, how many siblings? I'm just curious.
So I have 5 full siblings and 1 half brother.
Wow. So please, I interrupted you.
Oh, you're fine. But once my dad kind of, I guess, had proof that I was really intelligent, his viewpoint changed because a lot of the men in my family were all Republican politicians. So my dad was friends with Dick Cheney. I met Dick Cheney when I was 10. My dad served in the state House of Representatives. My uncle was a state senator, both Republicans. My cousin was the Republican county commissioner. So I grew up around the religious and Republican marriage was my whole life. If you are a Christian, you vote Republican, and it's all these issues. And when my dad saw those scores, he kind of changed his opinion to, instead of training you to be a housewife, I'm going to train you to be a constitutional judge. Like, and his vision for me was to be on the Supreme Court. His vision for me was to overturn Roe. Like, we had conversations about it. And so the plan was to keep me in school. And I graduated high school at 16. And my dad was like, I'm not letting you go to state school just because you're so young. And so his agreement with me was I had to go to Liberty for 1 year, and then I could decide where I wanted to go. The irony of that being was I had to pay for my own school. But I went, and Liberty, despite being the cancer that it is, it was the first time I was away from the abusive environment of home. I was away from my dad's thumb. I started to think on my own. I started to build friendships. And so I ended up doing all 4 years there because I didn't want to go back home. Yep. And I apologize, I'm a little hoarse today. My allergies, for whatever reason, so bad today.
Yeah, there's a lot of pollen. The whole weather system is messed up. I've heard you talk about global climate crisis as well in this whole discussion of what's happening in the United States. But I'm just so fascinated by your journey. So tell us how you started really questioning, and I think it had to do with a underage girl getting pregnant.
It did. So I had reservations growing up, especially because being a woman, I did not like the double standard of how the women were treated in the church. And I picked up on that as a kid, but it wasn't enough that I couldn't overrule it. So I would have these doubts and these questions, and then I would say, oh, that's just your ego. That's your pride. You're defying God. You're defying your true calling as a woman, because I knew from 12 years old that I did not want kids. And I was always not really a big fan of marriage either. And right? I was
Sorry
just like
for
that.
laughing.
I was like, that sounds
Child
like a scam.
of divorce and a controlling father.
Yeah, I wonder. But I would always, come back to, if I just submit enough to God's will, it's going to be fine. And the more doubts I had, the more I leaned in. So I was a very powerful Christian apologist. I knew the Bible backwards and forwards. I knew all the arguments. I very much was akin to Charlie Kirk. Very similar. and went through college, and I was, no exceptions pro-choice, super homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, all of the phobias. I went to my first day at Liberty. I had a Confederate flag keychain on my backpack that I carried the first few months at Liberty until a friend of mine pulled me aside and he's like, "Why do you do that?" And I was like, "Well, it's states' rights and, I did the talking points."
Right.
And he just looks at me and he says, "How do you think a black person feels when they see that flag?" And it just stopped me because being as narrow-minded and as bigoted as I was, I didn't realize that I was. And I didn't think I was being hateful. And when he said it in that way and I realized I was probably really hurting people emotionally because of a keychain, the keychain didn't matter anymore. I took the keychain off, threw it away, never looked back. But what really changed for me was after Liberty, I was engaged. I was doing all the right things. I was the virgin girl that found my husband and all the things. His half-sister turned up pregnant and she was 12. And I remember sitting in the room as this is, everyone, the family's talking about it and discussing what's going to happen. And she got pregnant because she had been being raped for 3 years by her mother's boyfriend. And I had been told my whole life that pregnancy from rape doesn't happen, that it's a lie the Democrats make up so that they can kill babies. That was a verbatim. So I believed that it wasn't possible. I can't remember what the senator's name was that said something like, when it's rape, the body rejects it, or something along that line, where he basically claimed it wasn't possible. That's how I believed. And I was 23.
Yeah.
I still believed after birth abortions were real. I had no understanding of the process of pregnancy. I had never had sex ed. I was very uninformed. But I'm sitting with her, and obviously I'm just there to support. I'm not an actual member of the family yet. And my immediate was, this is wrong. To say that this child, she's a child who has been raped for 3 years, now has to put her life on the line without a choice. She gets no choice. I was like, this is wrong. My viewpoint is wrong. And at one point, her stepmother, so her dad's wife, called me and said, "Hey, I can't get back from work in time. Can you take her to this pregnancy class?" Sure, of course. I take her, I come in. It's all these teen girls. I think there was one who was 19. The rest were 15, 16. None of the fathers were there except one girl's boyfriend. And in talking with the girls, all of the fathers were adult men. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, turning green from what the teacher's talking about. But also I'm like, my whole belief system is that these children should be more responsible for what's going on with them than these adult men that impregnated them. And this is wrong. And I'm watching this 12-year-old, and she was so brave. She was, and I'm like, this cannot be right. And I was still a very devout Christian. And in the back of the room, I'm like, a just and good God cannot be on board with this. If he is, he's not a good God. And so then I started researching data. I've always been a data person. I like information. So I started
reading
researching.
It for, I'd say so.
I like language. So I started researching data about abortion. I didn't know anything. And I remember one of the first statistics I found was that 97% of abortions, 93%, are before 14 weeks. And I was furious because I had been told it's all these late-term abortions and women are coming in the 9th month, and none of that is real.
Yeah.
After 20 weeks, it's either a lack of fetal viability or it's a medical emergency.
Right.
And I also didn't know that miscarriages are abortions. I had no idea. So I start finding all this information. I was really angry at my dad for a while because I was like, you lied to me. This is not knowing the information. This is a lie. And that was the one card that fell, and then everything else fell down with it. I had already started deconstructing certain religious doctrine I didn't agree with because theology was part of my degree you were required to take at Liberty. And I did that abroad in Israel. So I had started unpacking some of that as well. But when this happened, it just opened the floodgates for me. But it took 10 years to really unpack everything because I had been raised in it my whole life.
Right.
23 years, church twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. At Liberty, I went 4 times a week. You're memorizing a page of scripture every week at home. Yeah. That was the moment for me where I was like, something's not right.
Yeah, and you have this compass in your conscience and in your heart. Like when the guy said, "How do you think people feel when they see the Confederate flag?" It didn't take you long to
It
step
took me
out
that
of your
day.
shoes, step into his shoes and go, "Oh, okay, it's gone."
Yep.
So, but you're still very young and you have lots more to learn.
So
And I
much
know
to
you
learn.
read multiple books at one time, like myself, because you have a hunger to understand what the hell's going on. But you also have a passion to help others, which is what drew me to your work on Instagram.
Well, I think one of the saving things for me is that, I wasn't raised that empathy was a sin, first of all. I always, especially being abused at home, and I was also really overweight growing up, and my dad especially bullied me mercilessly for my weight and my looks. But what that created in me was this deep sense of empathy, this deep sense of, I hated if I saw someone crying in public. I would be the little kid that would run up to a stranger, even if it was an adult, and say, "Are you okay? Can I help you?" So I had this deep sense of empathy because I knew what it was like to be the odd man out. I knew what it was like to be hurt physically and emotionally. And I've always just been, I have curious tattooed on my wrist. I've always been a curious person.
I was going to ask you what that is.
Yeah. I've been so curious my whole life. I want the information. I think those 2 personality traits combined with my father really emphasized and to the dismantling of the faith he wanted me to hold, critical thinking. So he would do exercises with my younger brother and I where he would present us with a problem and he would not answer the problem. And it could be something like we were working on the ranch. Okay, we have this issue with this piece of equipment, or we have to get this task done, but here's some limiting factors. How are you going to get it done? And it used to drive me bananas, but it's a lifesaver now because he taught me how to really thoroughly problem solve. But because he did that is part of the reason I deconstructed as well. I'd already started deconstructing the biblical side of things before social issues because I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. You taught me how to critically think and everybody's parroting this, but I know this to be true. And I'm super thankful that he did that in retrospect.
So were you corporally punished?
Yes. Frequently and viciously.
With a hand, with a belt, with a paddle?
So my dad's favorite was the wooden spoon.
Ooh.
But he also would use anything that was handy if it called for it. So I got spanked with a bullwhip once.
Oof.
And my older brother was spanked with a frozen hose.
This is considered child abuse in most civilized countries, not the U.S., but you're not allowed to do corporal punishment in most civilized countries.
My argument for people, because a lot of people will viciously defend spanking children, and obviously being a child who was spanked growing up, I tell them, if someone sees you doing that to your dog, you'll get arrested. You probably shouldn't do it to your child.
And I'll just say I'm friends with one of the world's authorities on child trauma, Marty Teicher at Harvard, who does brain scans of children. And he says categorically it creates brain trauma. Yeah. And there's a whole history of people who rebelled against the Nazis by hiding their neighbors, the Jews. They weren't corporally punished. And the ones who were corporally punished, when the Nazis said, hand over your neighbors, they did. They complied because they were trained to frickin' obey.
And you're trained to obey, not because, what you're being told to do is good or right or it makes sense, but because you will be harmed if you do not do this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I will say in my growing up years, because, fundamentalism is on a spectrum. So my family was very, very strict. But I knew families that were stricter. We knew a family, they ran a gun shop, unironically, where the women were not allowed to wear pants. And there were other different, but what I found growing up, and this is anecdotal, it's strictly my experience.
Right.
The more strict the family was, the more rampant the abuse was, but also the more likely their children could not break free from this. They're the ones that they either ended up with addiction issues or deeply, deeply entrenched in the cult-like mindset. And the stricter it was, the worse it is.
Yeah, and my work is trying to explain authoritarian mind control and the bite model and all of that. And people say, but it's Christianity. And I have an influence continuum, and I talk about the really healthy religions are love-based. The really healthy parenting is not with physical abuse, but words. You're not supposed to steal your brother's food from his plate at the dinner table instead of whack, right?
Well, and it's the same thing, especially with the corporal punishment. I also, as an adult, can't hit another adult without risking facing charges. So why is it that children are the only ones we feel entitled that we can wail on when they don't know how the world works yet?
Right.
They're trying to learn how the world works. They're trying to learn how to be adults.
And they use this one verse from the Torah or the Old Testament about, spare the rod and spoil the child. I'm butchering the quote.
Well, and spare the rod, spoil the child is actually a Scottish proverb, but it's related to a proverb that says that he who withholds the rod hates his son. But the rod that's being spoken there is a shepherd's crook. So shepherd's hooks would hook a sheep around the neck and guide it to where it needed to be. They would use it to hit off predators, but they wouldn't beat their sheep with it. The goal of the hook was to be a guiding tool. It was to hook the sheep and guide them, because growing up on a ranch, we had sheep. And sheep, it is very clear and very offensive that the Bible compares humans to sheep, because sheep are dumb and they are stubborn, and they're one of the most difficult herd animals to work with. But the reason that the shepherd's hook is so effective is because if you can get one sheep to go the direction you need it to go, the rest of the sheep will follow.
Yeah.
So it's not about taking exactly, sheeple is correct. It's not about taking a stick and beating the sheep with it. It's about hooking the sheep to change its direction. Because I speak from experience being a young kid trying to work sheep. You can hit a sheep all you want. It will not change its mind. But if you stand in front of it, or you hook it, or you guide it, or you physically move it, it will move.
I think you're the first person that I've ever talked to who grew up with sheep and who could actually share real knowledge. And you're teaching me about a very important Bible concept that justifies all this child abuse, which is trying to just keep children to be clones of their parents, to adopt their parents' beliefs and be obedient children versus grow up and be their true self.
Yep. Don't be yourself. Be a mini-me.
Yep. And you were mentioning a bunch of phobias, including homophobia and xenophobia. And this is just, an irrational fear that's programmed into people's minds to keep them in this black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, simplistic version of what this incredible, robust reality is really about.
Well, and also the indoctrination only holds with repetition, and if you block access to that external information. So if and this is what my church leaders and my family did, the Democrats are your enemies. They hate you because you're a Christian. The homosexuals are your enemies. They hate you because you're a Christian. All these people hate you because you're a Christian. And then the reality is, I met my first openly gay couple, the most lovely humans I've ever encountered, who were people of faith themselves. But the goal of it is to bar access to that information, so that you just, it's a follow along routine, which is one of the reasons that and obviously it's Christianity in America because it's such a dominant religion. It's so easy for them to fall into fascism because fascism is all about put yourself in this box, be this thing, perform, step this way, say this thing, do exactly this, and don't listen to any other information. You look at book bans, book burnings. It's all about the control of information.
Yeah, and I'll just share quickly a friend of mine who's a psychologist who is excommunicated from the Mormons, a sixth-generation Mormon, John Dehlin, told me his story about how he was indoctrinated to have homophobia, and he's working at like a major corporation. And the person that he's working with, he really enjoys, and the guy's got a husband. And for him, it was like...
And you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, wait a minute. You're supposed to be mean and nasty and weird, and you're just a nice, normal person who loves your husband. And like, why did they teach us this crap?
Yep.
He got excommunicated because he spoke up for gay rights, because so many young people were committing suicide because they were gay, and they were put through these conversion therapy situations.
More
abuse, and exorcisms, abuse. And anyway, don't get me, we won't go off on Mormonism, but that's another dominant force in American politics that's pushing this fascistic view.
And it's really, I think that we see that because the Southern Baptist Convention is meeting in Dallas this week, and they've already overwhelmingly vote to pursue the Supreme Court overturning Obergefell. But they're also attacking...
That's gay marriage for those who don't know what that is.
But they're also attacking like restricting porn, sports betting, and willful childlessness. So they want
women should have babies only, right?
Yep, that's your purpose.
Yeah.
And they phrase it there, I can't remember directly, but it was something along the lines of insisting that America develop policy that is in alignment with God's designed family and gender roles, which means women have no resources, is the translation of that.
Yeah. Get rid of women's rights, what right to choose their health care, don't let them go to grad school or become doctors or lawyers or become politicians and run for president. Keep them in their box.
Yep, keep them in the house, keep them barefoot and poor. And the irony of that, because online, and this was something growing up, especially when I first started speaking out about my deconstruction. Well, why don't you just go to Iran then? I'm like, what is Iran and Afghanistan? They're Islamic theocratic states.
Right.
So what you're showing me is exactly what you're trying to create here. You just have a different logo. If you wanted to send me to a non-religious country, you'd send me to Norway, which, please, I would love to. They've got healthcare and women's rights, and they have a great standard of living and a high happiness quotient, and they're healthier and they live longer. Absolutely. Would love to. But they kind of show their cards by saying, well, why don't you go to this country? And I'm like, that's a theocratic state, which is what you say you want.
Right. So I'm on a mission. I've been doing this for 49 years. I wrote The Cult of Trump in 2019, and it came out again with a foreword by George Conway in 2024. And I'm trying to teach people who are willing to listen, like, how to interact with people in the cult of Trump.
Yes.
Don't call them morons or stupids. Stop attacking Trump or attacking policies or arguing rationally or logically, but reconnect warmly, respectfully, and ask them questions. And so when I met you online, and I'm listening to a brilliant woman who knows her stuff in a way that's very special, I wanted you to help me teach millions of people, this is what the Bible teaches. This is what they're teaching and claiming it's what the Bible teaches. And this is not real Christianity. And try to get people who are believers to to interact with these people who think that they need to, put donations on their credit card so their prosperity minister who claims to speak
yeah.
to God can get another plane,
Yeah.
or keep their children from getting vaccinations. So talk to me a little bit more about.
So one of the things that I tell like my followers, my Patreon users, is that don't waste your time on people who are openly hateful and violent. It's not worth the risk.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have to understand that the vast majority, and it's so hard in the context of the times that we're in now because there's so much open hateful rhetoric.
Yeah.
That most of these people, even in Christian nationalism, don't realize that they're Christian nationalists.
Right.
They don't realize that they're hateful, and they're not bad people. And that's really hard to hold on to when you're on the outside in. And I forget sometimes. And I'm like, wait, Monty, like when you were in this, you didn't realize that you were in it. You didn't realize you had been brainwashed and lied to. And you didn't realize that you were harming people. I had been taught, well, I have to oppose, homosexuality because if I don't, then they're going to hell and their blood's on my hands. I thought I was saving people. And I
was a Moonie.
You were a Moonie. You understand.
I did the same version, but I thought that Moon was the real Messiah. Jesus failed, by the way. And
Yep.
Jesus asked Moon to fulfill his mission. So I know the mindset too, but please continue.
And, it comes down to we have a lot more in common than we have in difference.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing is to find that common ground because it doesn't matter, like my siblings are still overwhelmingly conservative,
mm-hmm.
but they love their kids and they care about schools being around for their kids.
Mm-hmm.
They care about their daughters being able to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
They care about like their, our elderly relatives being able to access Medicaid and Medicare,
mm-hmm.
things like that. So there's a lot of, and I think that's one of the things that the big ugly bill brought to the forefront is how many Americans support these programs across party lines and really having a conversation about what helps and what hurts. And I think the way that to start deconstructing both Christian fundamentalism and what I call Christian republicanism, which are usually the same thing,
right,
is to find that common ground.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can start to ask questions, all it took for me, and it took a while, I had a seed of doubt. And when I was presented with new information, when I already had that doubt, it opened the door for me. But there were people along the way, like my friend Brian, who pointed out the keychain,
Yep.
my friend Kelly, who sat on the front steps with me, asking me questions about why I didn't support a woman's right to choose. And then the gay couple who invited me to the cookout after my dad died, after I had said something openly homophobic to one of them. But he understood my upbringing. He knew I had just lost my only parent. And he called me and he said, I'd love for you to come over. And it was these people who just gently inserted themselves in my life that just, they took that doubt and it gave me permission to explore it. And also it completely removed the steam from the argument of, oh, these hateful left-wing communist, demon worshipers.
Right.
It was just, I'm like, that's not real because these people love me. They care about me. They're sitting with me. And I look back now and I kind of just grab my head and I'm like, oh my God. Like, because I said and did some horrible things, but those people still stood with me. And I think I actually spoke with Kelly, who was a roommate who spoke to me about being pro-choice. I spoke to her the other day. And she was like, I knew that you cared about people. She was like, you just couldn't see past the dogma. And it helped. But it's finding that common ground that makes all the difference.
Absolutely, because our beliefs are our filters. And if we're looking through the world through these filters, and it's characteristic of low developmental standard too, because when the goal is to become an adult where you can know your values, know what you believe, but listen to other people, step into their shoes and expand your perspectives. When you travel around the world, you learn about other cultures and how they relate to things, etc. And that's what we want humanity to evolve and stop devolving, which is what Trump is trying to push right now.
Yeah.
Which is really, really bad.
And I would agree that because during my deconstruction started at 23, and from 25 to 29, I traveled a lot. So I got my passport, and I had a flight pass through one of the airlines, and I went to Spain 6 times in 1 year. I went all over Europe. I was in the Caribbean. And when you start to realize, because again, the other key component of Christian fundamentalism is this idea of American exceptionalism.
Right.
That America is the only successful nation, and we're the only free nation, and we're this nation under God. None of those things are true. And when you go to other countries and you realize, oh, like I'm actually more free here than I am. And like if I get hurt, I can go to the doctor without filing for bankruptcy.
Right.
And so that really helped my deconstruction, was dismantling this American exceptionalist idea. And that's one of the hard parts about the MAGA movement, the Trump movement. Many, many people in that demographic have never traveled. Yep. Many of them have not left the state that they are born in.
Uh-huh.
And so again, it solidifies the bubble. Everyone you know looks like you, thinks like you, believes like you, doesn't have any experience outside of you. When I moved to New York City, I mean, there were people back home that were just like, oh my goodness. It was treated like it was some exotic, like I had moved to Dubai, but it's because of perspective. And, I think, what is it? Only like less than half of Americans even have a passport, and less than that have ever used it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very narrowing mindset, and that's in part related to our work culture, because a lot of people don't get paid vacation time, right, or they don't get long enough to go to Europe, versus in Europe, you have 6 weeks of paid vacation. So you can take these trips, you can immerse yourself in another culture, you can fly across the world, and you can't do that here.
Yep, exactly. So I need to ask you, when did you start singing and writing songs? Because you have a gift.
So music was I was my dad's favorite child. And that was just the way it was, and it was unfortunate. But he would repeatedly tell me that I was his hope as a father, which was a lot to put on a 10-year-old. But one of the reasons that my dad and I were so close was that we shared music. He taught me how to sing. I grew up singing in nursing homes with my dad. So I know a lot of music from the 40s and 50s. The first song I ever sang in public was Daddy's Hands to a nursing home.
Okay, give us a few
I'm not going to do that just because I'm so hoarse from allergies.
Okay, all right.
But my dad's rule was, I was 5, and his rule was I couldn't sing it unless I had memorized all the words. So he wouldn't let me use lyrics. And so that was time that my dad and I would spend my whole life, even through college. When I would come home, he would book an hour-long set at a nursing home, and we would go sing at the nursing home. And I grew up singing in church, and I did choir and ensemble in high school, and I was a soloist in high school. And when I was 5, I remember someone asked me, when you come up to a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I told this woman, I looked her in the face and I said, I want to sing and write books and stuff. And I just walked off. And that was my...
go to montemader.com. There's a bunch of her original songs with her singing it. I was listening before while I was waiting for you to come for this recording. And I love your lyrics and I love your voice. So
thank you. And it's definitely evolved over the last few years, because I've been performing a lot more the last 5 years than I ever did in my life. My dad loved music, but he also had really strong limiting beliefs about it. So he wouldn't let me go to school for the arts. I wanted to, but he wouldn't. He was like, nope, you're going for sciences or law. Okay. So I didn't start actually doing music and writing my own music until I was 25.
Okay. Well, I think you've got a lot of songs in there that because I really believe music is the universal language.
Me too.
And when Trump said what he said about Bruce Springsteen, I immediately made a video going, boy, did he make a mistake.
It's like, do you know who Bruce Springsteen is? And
People
he's
grew
always
up for
stood for
decades.
this.
Your
For
base.
decades.
Decades.
Yes. And also, Bruce has always been like this. This is not a new
Correct.
stance for him. He has always been in touch with the zeitgeist. He has always been a protester.
He loved Woody Guthrie. That was, yeah.
And it cracks me up because the band I perform with now, we do a lot of rock, hard rock, metal. But one of my favorite bands in the world is Rage Against the Machine. And it would surprise me a little bit in Trump's first campaign, but a lot in his second campaign. People be posting, when did Rage Against the Machine get so woke? And I'm like, have you listened to their music? They've always been like this. They've always been a political group. They've never hidden that, and it would just be interesting when I'd perform with my band in Nashville, the people that we would have request Killing in the Name of. I was like, ooh, you haven't listened to these lyrics. You haven't actually listened to what this is about. This has always been against the machine or the establishment,
Right. So I listened to, because I'm a subscriber now, I listened to you say that you may have a book deal in the works, possibly. Because you just mentioned, I'm going to sing and I'm going to write books.
Yes. And so that was when I first started having conversations about a book deal, that memory dropped back in. I'm like, oh my gosh, I said this when I was 5. But yeah, so I'm in talks for a memoir and kind of working out the details. I found a group that I really like that I haven't signed anything yet, but we've kind of really talked through the verbal side of things. I got the first contract last week.
Get a great intellectual property lawyer, because my first book I didn't, and I regretted it for 27 years till I bought the rights back to my own book. And
yep, got to do well. That's the other thing. So I got the first contract, and now I need an attorney to look over everything, and that's what I'm working on.
I got a good one if you need one.
I would love a referral. That would be great, because I don't know what I'm doing.
We'll talk later, but seriously, these days, plus you have 1 million followers. Like, that is like, you should get in a big advance.
That's the plan.
I'm happy to talk with you. I've done 5 books now, so I'm happy.
I will take any advice you can give me, because that is a dream of mine. It's something that I always wanted to do.
Well, one of the things that I grew up in a different era, probably your dad's era, where I was like typewriters with ribbons and whiteout era, and then I got to the Apple, 2 or whatever in 1982, and I learned word processing. But these days, you just talk and it gets transcribed, and then
which
you
is incredible.
Edit. So you can sit down and tell your story like we're doing now, but like book a week and with somebody, and they'll ask you questions, and that's the memoir. I mean, seriously, then you get it. Edit is the theme. You don't just write it, even though Combating.
It's the editing that takes a while.
Combating came out in 6 weeks. It was like channeled, because I wanted it to come out for the 10th anniversary of Jonestown, and I procrastinated. And my publisher said, if you want it to come out November 18th, I need the book. So I stopped everything except going to the bathroom and eating and sleeping, and I just poured it out, and became a bestseller. And that started my career. People started taking me seriously, because what was I? I was an ex-Moonie.
Yep.
That wasn't going to get me too far. But anyway, back to you. So, do your siblings respect you? You have, the nose ring and the nails that are 5 inches long. That must take a while to put on. What's the reaction to people that knew you?
So it's kind of, as you might imagine, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I don't really hear from my extended family at all, and most of the people that I grew up with or went to school with won't speak to me. Unless they have deconstructed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Those people I'm very close with now. But my siblings, it's a little bit mixed as well. But that's in part because when my parents got divorced, my dad was the kind of parent that he was like, your mother's an adulteress. The Bible says you can't have anything to do with her. He weaponized scripture to basically create a rift between us and her. And it was very much, if you choose to talk to her or be with her, then you can't stay here with me.
So parental alienation. So
Yes.
you were mind controlled by your father regarding your
Very
mom.
much. Very much. And so, in the way that the family split apart, my 4 older siblings did end up going and living with my mom. And my younger brother and I were the only 2 siblings raised our whole lives together.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty alienated from my 4 older siblings for 11 years, close to 11 years. And so there's no animosity between us. They definitely know where my beliefs are, and they don't really talk to me about it because they know I'll confront them. But I'm still really close to my younger brother. And I'm pretty close to my oldest sister as well, who actually has been doing really, really well. She's really started to, I think she, more than the rest of us, really suffered from the trauma of the religious abuse. And she's finally really getting help and healing now, and it's noticeable.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. But so you were not only beaten with a whip at some point, but you had parental alienation. That's a whole other, brainwashing system that I've dealt with a lot. And, I first learned about it just from working with people in formal cults, religious cults. If one of the parents leaves the cult brainwashes the kids, wants the kids to stay in, and the effector is the evil one, or the demon or whatever.
Well, and my dad did a lot of the love in my house was based on achievement. So if you did the right things and you said the right things, then you were given love and attention. If you didn't, then you weren't. And that was one of the reasons that I became my dad's favorite, is I was very good at, I could perceive what the checklist was, and I would check the checklist. My younger brother was always distinctly more himself our whole growing up years than I was. And so Travis, his name's Travis, got into a lot of trouble because he wouldn't just blindly fall in line the way that I was willing to. And it wasn't even blind on my part, it was strategic. I knew that if I didn't want to get beaten or if I didn't want these negative consequences, I knew to check the boxes.
Yeah.
And my brother just was more of a free spirit than I was. He just didn't, it took, he was a great kid. I'm not saying he misbehaved. He didn't at all.
Right.
He just wouldn't blindly fall in line just because. And that was a huge distinction in our family. And at one point, I mean, they used to put me on starvation diets as punishment.
It's another child abuse thing.
Yeah, because they would, and like I said, I was overweight, so that was their excuse. But, if I got in trouble or I ate too much or they perceived I did something, they would, not let me eat. And that was a repressed memory that I didn't remember until I was 19. And I was staying with one of my sisters, and I came down the stairs after a night of just not sleeping very well. And I looked at her and I was like, did Dad used to starve me? And she's like, yeah, you don't remember that? And I was like, I do now. But it was one of those things that my body had just compartmentalized for me.
So mind control is listed in the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 5, as a dissociative disorder. It literally talks about cults, brainwashing, thought reform, and a disruption of identity. Now, I was recruited at 19, so I had an identity, I had values, I was never hit as a kid, and I was the youngest of 3. I have 2 older sisters. So Steve was this, then the Mooney Steve got created and suppressed the real me and was convinced that he was satanic, but he's following the Messiah and his wife, my true parents. And I'm doing my hands for those who are listening, and you can look at the video. But the point is that when people get out of a mind control thing, there's so much that's not remembered. There's a disconnect with your body, and you can't make a chronological story of accurate story at first. You interview other people and you start putting pieces together. but it's not uncommon that people have no recollection of really difficult, especially traumatic events that happen.
And I have a lot more of my memories now, but when I remember when I was in college, I really couldn't remember my childhood. There was just these big gaping blank spots.
Yeah.
And I had to slowly put it together, talk to my siblings, talk to people around us.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was very much, and it's interesting that you bring up, that it's a dissociative disorder, because I would have dissociative episodes as a kid, not knowing what they were and not knowing what caused them really until the last 3 years. I would have these moments where I remember trying to describe it to my dad because it happened to me when we were at Disneyland.
Uh-huh.
And I said, Dad, I don't feel like I'm in my body. I feel like I'm dreaming. I feel like I'm in a dream. And he didn't know what he thought. It was just like, oh, she's really excited. She's out of her mind. I thought, oh, maybe I'm just tired. I've never been on an airplane before. Maybe this is what airplanes feel like. And I realized looking back that I was having dissociative episodes as a kid.
And think about it. If you're a kid and an adult is hitting you with a wooden spoon or whatever, and it hurts, the typical reaction to not have all that intense pain is to like go to the ceiling or to escape somewhere else so you don't have to experience the full brunt of the pain. This is a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
But recovery is integration, loving yourself. That's one of your songs about, I've looked in the mirror and I realized who I need to love, and being in your body and really listening to your intuition and your gut, because we now know we have neurons in our guts. It's not just neurons up here, but we have neurons down here. And it tells us things. And a lot of my population, Monte, have psychosomatic disorders. They have migraines and back pains and skin problems and eating disorders and sexual disorder, all these other things. But the root is the mind control.
Well, and because the other interesting thing about mind control, and it's interesting, again, because one of my siblings fell into addiction. I experienced anorexia nervosa in high school after I lost the weight.
So you had an eating disorder.
So I had an eating disorder, and I also had chronic skin conditions for a while. I still get migraines, though not as frequently as I used to. But one of the things when you're coming out of mind control and that kind of programming is, because you have to, your voice has been squashed for so long that you don't know what you sound like. So I went through 3 years of, I would have a thought and say, wait, is that my thought? Or is that someone else's thought? Is that something that someone put into me? And it took me years to understand what my voice sounds like and what my intuition feels like. Because you're taught, ignore yourself. You are inherently sinful. So don't trust yourself. You need to do what your pastor says or your dad says or God says, whoever the patriarch is that they're choosing at that particular moment. That you start to lose your sense of intuition. And that's another thing that took me years to get back. And now my intuition is really sharp, but I've had to train it. And a lot of my deconstruction, and it sounds terrible to say it this way, but I credit to my father's death. I started deconstructing at 23. My dad died at 25, which was an earth-shattering experience for me because despite all the abuse, he was my best friend. I loved my dad. And some of that is family. Some of it's a little Stockholm syndrome, I'm sure.
Trauma bonding.
Bonding.
It's not Stockholm. I can explain what that is, but go on.
I couldn't remember the word I was looking for. But he still had such a chokehold in my life.
Yep.
I don't think I would have been able to deconstruct the way I did had he not passed away. Because I remember saying the first year, I just couldn't function. I fell into alcoholism. I almost committed suicide. But once I got through that first 10 months, I remember sitting with one of my friends and saying, I feel like I'm free to be me for the first time. Because there was no more shame. There was no more fear of him withdrawing his love, because he did that with all of my siblings. If you crossed him, he'd cut you off. He didn't have, so there was all that fear and all that shame, and the guilt was gone. And,
that makes perfect sense to me.
Really started me on my path. Yeah.
And then, learn. And this is another thing with my clients who are born into abusive, religious cults, political cults, therapy cults, whatever. They don't know what's normal. So part of the therapy is just psychoeducation of like, how does healthy parenting look like?
What do they do?
How do they do conflict resolution? And, and treating each other as equals, parents, for example, and the power of playtime and creativity and exposure to people outside your religious thing, whatever, to meet people from other countries, other, cultures and such.
Yep. I remember so my band is some of my closest friends, and my drummer, his parents have kind of become the band parents.
Uh-huh.
And when I first met their whole family, I was suspicious because I'm like, you are shockingly normal. Like, you're so kind to each other, and you talk things out, and like, I became a whole biological adult and did not know how to resolve conflict. I did not know how to communicate my needs because in a cult, your needs don't matter. Like, you're going to, I grew up in this environment of you're going to get married and have kids and you just need to stay home and do it. And that's what you're called to do, things like that. So watching his family, I was like, there's people like this that are real. Like, and your kids are normal and you guys don't hate each other. And like, it was such an interesting thing for me to watch.
It's really critical. And also another pattern, I don't think you have kids, but another pattern I see all the time is when people have children, they start to get their child's perspective, then memories come back of their childhood that they hadn't thought of, et cetera, but often it's motivation by seeing their child. Like, I don't want my child to have to grow up with what I grew up with. We're getting out of here.
Yep.
And that's amazing. Monte, we're going to be wrapping up shortly, but you have such a spirit and a passion and an intelligence, and and we're going to do an Instagram live. You promised.
Yes, I promised you.
And
I would love to.
But seriously, I'd love to talk to you more about how we can message to people so they'll reach out to their Christian nationalist, Republican in the silo group and use some of your knowledge. But my tactic, unlike most of what I see of what you're putting out on Instagram, is more of a gentle question. Like, help me understand. You say this, but the Bible says this. What do you make of this? And just be quiet and let them percolate on that and just plant some seeds, right? And then and then in terms of just modeling that there's life after that belief system, because you have phobias that have been installed in your head that you're going to lose your spiritual life and you'll be possessed by demons and all this crap. And you're like,
it's like, actually, my life is the best it's ever been. Like,
I'm doing fitness, I'm singing songs, I'm rocking it. It's and that survivor thriver model is what I want to promote more amongst folks who were raised in these abusive, controlling, authoritarian religions and families.
Because it does make you feel stuck.
Yeah, last words are yours.
No, I agree. And I think that I'm already noticing that people are starting to wake up. And it's different kinds of waking up. I see people who are in their deconstruction or on the path who are starting to get more vocal, which is wonderful because that's exactly what we need. But also people who have been deeply entrenched and deeply harmed, starting to ask questions. And I even had a relative reach out to me not long ago saying, I really admire your life, which was such an impactful thing for her to say. And that was my encouragement to her was, there's so much beyond what we were told is out there for us.
Right.
And it's really important that we don't allow a system to tell us what life we get to live. Because
Yeah.
if I had lived the life that I was told God wants me to live, I would be the most unhappy human being on the planet. Because that's not what I'm made for.
No.
You know, and it's really to be there when people fall out of the cult, because it's a very confusing and disconcerting time. And be willing to ask them questions and let them ask questions.
Exactly. MonteMader.com. Check her out. She's on Instagram. She has a Patreon. Listen to her music and follow her. And it's an honor. It's a pleasure. Hope to meet you in person one day.
I would love to do that.
Yeah, it would be so cool. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye. Bye.